Okay, so this tutorial is going to look at the poem Home Thoughts from Abroad, which was written by Robert Browning. Let's deal with a little bit of contextual information first of all. So Robert Browning lived from 1812 to 1889, and he was a pre-eminent Victorian poet and playwright. He was happily married to his fellow poet Elizabeth Barrett Browning for 15 years. Elizabeth was an invalid for much of her life, and in 1846 the couple decided to move to Italy in the hope that it would improve her health. Unfortunately, she died there in 1861, leaving Robert to bring up their 12-year-old son alone. Now this poem, this popular lyric poem, was written in 1845, so that's before he moves there permanently, and at this point in time he's on a short trip to northern Italy. It's also important to be aware that at this point in time the British Empire is one of the most powerful empires on the globe, and there's an awful lot of pride in England about this idea of Britishness. It's also important to be aware that unlike today, it wouldn't have been easy to travel between England and Italy. It would have taken a lot of time, and that's perhaps why he's longing for England so much in this poem. So let's start by looking at this first verse. Home thoughts from abroad. Oh, to be in England, now that April's there, and whoever wakes in England sees, some morning, unaware, that the lowest boughs and the brushwood sheaf round the elm-tree bole are in tiny leaf, while the chaffinch sings on the orchard bough in England, now. Okay, so let's look at the way it starts with that exclamative. Oh, to be in England, okay? I think what that's doing is it's showing this kind of excitement, but also passionate homesickness. You know, he's really longing to be in England at this point in time. And that's because he makes it clear in the next sentence that it's springtime there, now that it's April. Okay, so the conjunction now is really emphasizing the fact that it's because it's April that's why he wants to be there. He then continues with this fronted conjunction and whoever wakes in England sees some morning unaware. So I think the way that we get this fronted conjunction and the way that we get all these pauses, so look at the caesura here and here and here, the pauses at the ends of the line, I think that all of those things kind of reflect the way that his thoughts are kind of cascading and tumbling out. He feels this passionate homesickness, and he starts to reflect on what it must be like to be in England in the springtime and all the sense of kind of positivity and beauty that comes with that, and his thoughts kind of cascade and tumble out over each other. It's also a reflective poem, so these pauses in the caesura and at the ends of the line also give us those kind of moments for reflection. And that kind of reflective tone is also reinforced in these long vowel sounds. We get a couple here, but actually we get loads in this long line here, that the lowest boughs and brushwood sheaf. And I think those long vowel sounds give it a kind of wistful air of longing. They're really trying to kind of create the sense of beauty that he feels that England has in the springtime. Now in this line here as well, and whoever wakes in England sees some morning unaware, what he does really successfully is moves from the personal to the universal. So he's not just talking about, oh, he misses England on a personal level because he's on this foreign tour, but he's actually for a moment imagining what it must be like to be someone experiencing England now at first hand, when he talks about whoever wakes in England sees. Now it seems like he's perhaps a little bit envious of that at this point in time, that he has such a longing to be there. And the brief use of this kind of third person narrative here, whoever wakes in England sees, kind of makes the poet's homesickness seem even more acute, doesn't it? It doesn't diminish it thinking about somebody else waking up in England. It makes it even more acute that he can imagine somebody waking up in England and seeing all this beauty, but he's not there to see it. So by eliminating the geographical divide between the poet and the landscape, it allows him to focus on the details through the eyes of a witness who is at least theoretically there, while at the same time he universalizes the feelings he's experiencing to embrace what anyone might feel in his situation. Now let's come back to this line that we've looked at. So we've looked at the kind of long vowel sounds here. I mean, I think in this whole section, like I've put here, there's this sense of a kind of new season returning, you know, the spring is the beginning of the year, not kind of in the literal calendar, but in the sense that everything's coming back into life. And now there's a sense of hopefulness and gladness there. Maybe there's a sense, you know, with this chaffinch returning, that he'll be like that too. He'll be able to return to England just like the chaffinch has. We get these pre-modifiers, look, the lowest, the brushwood sheaf, the elm tree bowl, and the tiny leaf. Okay, so all of these pre-modifiers, lowest, brushwood, tiny, elm tree, what they're doing is they're adding detail to the description, and this becomes a very kind of visual poem. There's lots of sights and sounds in it, and that's one of the ways in which he really celebrates nature. So adding that pre-modification enables him to add that detail in a very concise way so that we can really imagine the scene that he's describing. And there's a sense that he kind of feels glad, although he's sad not to be there. There's in the kind of beauty that comes through in the description, there's a sense that it's kind of even imagining that beauty fills his heart with gladness at thinking about how stunning springtime is in England. As well as the kind of descriptive element here, the form of the poem also reinforces this sense of beauty. I mean, we've had a A-B rhyme scheme in this first section, and then here we get a rhyming couplet, and we kind of shift into iambic pentameter. So what that does is it gives a kind of extra poetic feel to it, and gives it a real kind of beauty and regularity in its rhythm that I think draws our attention to the beauty of nature. This line's also iambic pentameter too, and then there's an abrupt shorter line here, isn't there, in England now. So I think what that shorter line does after the 3 lines of iambic pentameter, it really brings a sense of immediacy. You know, this is happening right now. We've obviously got the adverb now, which is bringing a sense of kind of excitement and longing as well. On top of that, we talked about some of the sights that we've got. We've also got the sound of the chaffinch singing, okay, and the reference to birdsong recreates the beauties of the sound of spring, which is what he's missing. And then at the beginning of the next section, we get this real sense of kind of incrementum, so this sense of things increasing and building. And after April, when May follows and the whitethroat builds and all the swallows. So look at these repeated conjunctions. 2 of them are fronted as well, and I think all of that repetition of that conjunction is what's building this incrementum, which is really emphasizing the kind of building beauty of England at this point in time. What he's trying to capture is a kind of heightened activity in springtime. So it's when all of a sudden all of the flowers are going to be in bloom, and all the birds are going to be out and going to be singing. Okay, and he's trying to create a sense of a vivid picture of all of that. We've also got another exclamative here, just like the first verse ended with. Okay, so really showing a kind of feeling of passion for how beautiful England is at this point in time. And then we get the next section. Okay, so hark where my blossomed pear tree in the hedge leans to the field and scatters on the clover blossoms and dewdrops at the brent spray's edge. That's the wise thrush. He sings each song twice over, lest you should think he never could recapture the first fine careless rapture. So look, he talked kind of briefly in a third person narrative before, but this is becoming very personal now, isn't it? Where my tree and my garden is, okay? So that personal possessive pronoun is showing a connection, almost an ownership of England that he feels. And then he goes on here to kind of personify the tree. And it's almost as if the tree wakes itself up by shaking away the morning dew. And all of these richly traced details kind of bring the sparkling scene alive for the reader. Again, just like we noted before in the first verse, we've also got a lot of caesura and a lot of pauses, and that's something that continues into the second stanza as well. So note, I've circled these for you here, okay, all the caesura and the pauses, and of course another exclamation mark. I forgot to circle that, but we spoke about that. And then he continues with these closely observed details, for example, of the wise thrush who's singing each song twice over. So that's our second reference to birdsong. So again, really trying to create the joyful sounds of spring. And I think these closely observed details of the bird's habits intensifies the experience for the reader, and we really see them through the poet's eyes. And then he sort of gives the thrush human motivations here and attributes, because he talks about, lest you think he should never recapture the first fine careless rapture. Okay, so it's almost as if the thrush realizes that he needs to sing the song again just to prove that it can be just as beautiful the second time round. And I think that kind of humanizing of the animal underlines the way that he's trying to add these really fine details of nature, and it's definitely idealizing the reality for the reader. Again, we get another exclamative here, which works alongside the word rapture to really show us the kind of intense pleasure and joy that's coming in response to the bird song. And again, just another exclamative really showing the kind of passion of his feelings. Then he continues with another fronted conjunction, so adding more onto the description. There's even more beauty to see here. And though the fields look rough with hoary dew, all will be gay when noontime wakes anew. The buttercups, the little children's dower, far brighter than this gaudy melon flower. So again, in terms of the sort of textured, the description here, it becomes textured, doesn't it? So all the way through we get these kind of colours and textures which combine to depict the early morning scene, to help us really vividly imagine that scene and to make it very real to us through this appeal to the senses. We then get the personification of noontide, okay, when it wakes anew. I think personifying nature in this way really helps to give it kind of a sense of life and intention, which also amplifies its beauty. Again, so we kind of get implied colour sometimes through the blossoms, and then here through the buttercup. Well, we know that buttercups are yellow, so that's implied, and that again kind of labelling these, like with the pear tree blossom and labelling the buttercups, it anglifies it, doesn't it? These are things that we would expect to see in England. And it also taps into a kind of shared English identity, talking about the kind of games that little children might be playing with the buttercups, which adds to a kind of sense of mutual experience in the poem. And then obviously we end with this contrast, far brighter than this gaudy melon flower. So the gaudy melon flower is the one that he can see in Italy. And what he's doing, you know, gaudy means kind of bright or showy. It suggests that there's something tasteless about this flower. And what he's suggesting then is that, you know, that Italy is nowhere near as beautiful as England in the springtime. And just in case we weren't sure about that, he finishes with another exclamative as well, just to really show that kind of passionate sense of love for England. So as we've gone through, we've kind of talked about the sensory aspect of the poem. So I would say there's a real feast for the senses in the poem here, particularly for the eyes and the ears. So we picked out those sights and sounds. So Browning's incorporating this wealth of sensory language and these very closely observed details to infuse the life of the birds and the kind of vegetation he depicts as being typical of springtime in England. So there's like implicit and explicit colours, and we've noticed some of those, like white throat, buttercups, gaudy. We've got the textures of the brushwood and being rough. We've got the sounds of kind of nest building and different songbirds, and the cumulative effect of all of that is a very joyful celebration of nature in the springtime. And remember, springtime promises new beginnings and new hopes, so there's a real contrast between this poem and the poem To Autumn by Keats in your collection. The poet's nostalgia for his country is really shown here, isn't it, at this what he feels to be exciting time of year. It's a very heartfelt joy, but it's not melancholy. So whilst he kind of wishes he was there, he's not miserable about it. Okay, these very vivid descriptions and images are just supposed to share the pride and joy that he feels of the beauties in his native landscape, which he wishes he could experience all over again firsthand. So just lastly then, I don't think I said at the beginning that this is a short lyric poem. We've picked out a couple of moments of iambic pentameter, and there is definitely a kind of rhythm and a meter that runs throughout the poem, and that I think what that does is it kind of rises and falls just like the way the poet's thoughts do, and like the way that he is resigned to the fact that home is far away.